Second chances, only distance, wind, and the cold certainty of steel. Picture it. A lone rider slows his horse, eyes locked on a faint cloud of dust rising along the horizon. It could be a herd or it could be men. Either way, the outcome won't be decided at arm's length. There's no dramatic countdown, no spinning revolvers, just a steady breath, a tightened grip, and the knowledge that one well-placed shot might be the difference between riding on or never riding again. This was the real frontier. Not the quick-draw fantasy painted by Hollywood, but a wide, unforgiving expanse where fights often began hundreds of yards apart. And in that world, pistols were secondary. Survival belonged to the man who carried a rifle, fast, reliable, and powerful enough to end a fight before it ever truly began. That's where the lever-action rifle changed everything. With a flick of the hand, it could chamber round after round faster than any muzzleloader ever could. It gave cowboys, lawmen, and outlaws the ability to stay in the fight, to fire again and again without breaking rhythm. Whether hunting buffalo across open plains or facing down a threat in the distance, these rifles weren't just weapons. They were lifelines, but not all lever actions were created equal. Some were dependable tools. Others were something else entirely. Built with raw power and unforgiving force, they earned reputations that spread across the frontier like whispered warnings. And that raises the real question. When survival was on the line, which of these rifles became the most feared, and why? The frontier didn't wait for you to reload. It punished you if you couldn't keep up. Before lever-action rifles came into their own, most firearms were slow, deliberate, and unforgiving. A man with a single-shot musket had one chance to get it right. Miss that shot, and you were left fumbling with powder and ball while the world closed in around you. On an open plain or in the middle of a sudden ambush, that delay could be fatal. Speed wasn't just an advantage, it was survival. Then came a shift that changed everything. Early repeating rifles began to appear, clunky at first, but full of promise. And out of that evolution came the lever-action system, a piece of mechanical ingenuity that felt almost unfair in comparison. With a simple pull and push of the lever, a fresh round snapped into place. No powder horns, no ramrods, just a smooth, continuous rhythm of fire that could keep a man in the fight far longer than ever before. Imagine a buffalo hunter facing a charging herd, needing more than one shot to bring down massive animals before they thundered past. Or a lawman outnumbered, relying on speed and precision to hold his ground. Even in the chaos of frontier conflicts, where distance and mobility mattered, the ability to fire multiple rounds without breaking focus gave lever-action rifles a decisive edge. But here's where things get interesting. While many of these rifles were effective, a select few pushed beyond practicality into something far more formidable. Their power, range, and sheer impact made them stand apart, not just as tools, but as weapons that reshaped encounters entirely. And those are the rifles we're about to step into next. Few rifles carry a nickname as bold or as debated as this one. The Winchester Model 1873 is often called the gun that won the West. It's a title that echoes through movies, books, and legend, painting a picture of an unstoppable firearm that defined an entire era. And to be fair, there's truth in that reputation. This rifle was everywhere. Cowboys carried it in saddle scabbards, lawmen leaned on it to keep order, and outlaws trusted it when things turned violent. It was reliable, fast, and chambered in .44-40, a cartridge that conveniently matched many revolvers of the time, simplifying life on the frontier. But here's where the myth starts to crack. The .44-40 round, while effective at closer ranges, wasn't built for long-distance dominance or overwhelming stopping power. In a tight encounter, a saloon standoff, or a sudden ambush, it performed exactly as needed. Quick follow-up shots, manageable recoil, and solid accuracy made it a dependable companion. You can imagine a sheriff holding his ground against a fleeing suspect, working the levers smoothly, each shot controlled and deliberate. Now shift that scene. Open terrain, greater distance. A target that doesn't go down easily. Suddenly, the limitations begin to show. The same rifle that felt unstoppable in town could struggle when the stakes and the distance grew higher. So while the Model 1873 earned its place in history, it wasn't the most powerful force on the frontier. It was dependable, yes, but not the most brutal, and that raises an even bigger question. If this iconic rifle wasn't the pinnacle of power, then what was? If the Model 1873 was about balance, the next rifle threw that balance aside in favor of one thing: raw, undeniable power. The Winchester Model 1876 stepped onto the frontier like a heavyweight contender. Built to handle larger, more punishing cartridges, it answered a growing demand for something the earlier rifles struggled with: stopping power. Out on the plains, where a single shot might need to bring down a massive bison or end a fight before it could escalate, this rifle delivered force in a way that few others could match. Picture a hunter facing a charging animal, the ground trembling beneath pounding hooves. There's no time for a second guess. The trigger is pulled, and the impact isn't just a hit, it's a statement. The kind of force that drops something big, fast, and dangerously close. That's where the 1876 earned its reputation. It wasn't subtle, and it didn't need to be. But power always comes with a price. The rifle was heavier, harder to handle, and its recoil reminded you of every ounce of force it carried. In tight, fast-moving situations, that weight could slow you down. Cycling the lever wasn't as effortless, and staying quick on your feet became a challenge. This wasn't the kind of rifle you casually swung in a close-quarters encounter. It demanded space, control, and a steady hand. Still, for those who needed that extra edge, hunters, frontiersmen, anyone facing larger threats, it was worth it, because when it worked decisively. And yet, even with all that power, there were rifles that pushed brutality even further, in ways that weren't just about size or strength alone. Some rifles were built to fight. Others were built to end the fight with a single shot. The Marlin Model 1895 belonged firmly in that second category. Chambered in massive calibers like .45-70, this wasn't a rifle you carried for convenience. It was one you carried when the stakes were as high as they could get. Out on the frontier, where a wounded animal could turn into a deadly threat in seconds, or where a single mistake could cost everything, this kind of power wasn't just useful, it was necessary. Imagine standing your ground as something big and dangerous closes the distance. There's no time for follow-up shots, no room for error. You fire once, and that one shot has to matter. The Model 1895 delivered exactly that kind of certainty. Its rounds didn't uberload hit, they hit hard, with a force that could drop large game where it stood. That kind of impact earned it a reputation, not just as effective, but as brutal. What set it apart wasn't just power, but how it was built to handle it. Compared to its Winchester counterpart, the Marlin design offered a solid side-ejecting system and a reputation for strength that many shooters trusted when using heavier loads. It felt different in the hands, more deliberate, more grounded, like a tool designed with one purpose in mind: maximum stopping force. Of course, that kind of strength came with weight, recoil, and a demand for control. But for those who needed the absolute upper edge of lever-action firepower, nothing else quite compared. And even then, the story of frontier firepower doesn't end here. Because sometimes, the most feared rifles weren't just powerful, they were something else entirely. Before the frontier learned to rely on power, it learned to fear something else entirely: volume. The Henry rifle didn't look like the most intimidating weapon at first glance. It wasn't the biggest, and it didn't fire the heaviest rounds. But what it introduced was something the frontier had never truly seen before: the ability to keep firing, and firing, and firing again without stopping. During the Civil War, this rifle earned a reputation that spread quickly through whispered accounts and hard lessons. Soldiers armed with Henry rifles could unleash a stream of shots, while others were still struggling to reload a single round. There's a reason it was said that a man with a Henry could load on Sunday and shoot all week. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a complete shift in how fights were won. Now imagine that same advantage carried into the frontier. A lone settler defending his land, outnumbered but not outgunned. Instead of firing once and scrambling to reload, he holds his position, working the lever in a steady rhythm, sending round after round downrange. The effect isn't just physical, it's psychological. Opponents expecting pauses are met with relentless fire, forcing them back, breaking momentum before they can even close the distance. That's where the Henry's brutality came from. Not in raw impact, but in its ability to overwhelm. It changed tactics, turned the tide of encounters, and proved that speed could be just as deadly as strength. And in doing so, it laid the groundwork for every lever-action rifle that followed, each one building on that same idea, but pushing it further in its own way. So what actually made a rifle brutal on the frontier? It wasn't as simple as picking the biggest caliber or the loudest shot. It was a combination of factors that came together in the moment that mattered most. Start with raw power. A heavier caliber, like the ones used in rifles such as the Marlin 1895, delivered devastating impact. When a single shot needed to drop a large animal or end a threat immediately, that kind of force was unmatched. But power alone didn't guarantee effectiveness. If that shot missed or came too late, it didn't matter how strong it was. Then there was range. Out on open land, the ability to hit a target at distance could decide everything before a fight even began. A rifle that performed well up close, like the Winchester 1873, might struggle when the gap widened, forcing its user into situations where they were already at a disadvantage. Now add rate of fire. This is where rifles like the Henry changed the equation entirely. The ability to send multiple rounds downrange without pause created pressure. Constant, unrelenting pressure that could overwhelm opponents both physically and mentally. Sometimes, brutality wasn't about one decisive blow, but about never letting up. And that brings in the final piece, psychological impact. The sound, the speed, the sheer presence of a weapon could shape how an encounter unfolded before a shot was even fired. In the end, brutality wasn't a single trait, it was context. Distance, timing, and purpose all played their part. And when you put all of that together, a clearer picture begins to form, leading us to the final question of which rifle truly stood above the rest. In the end, the Wild West was never truly shaped by legend. It was shaped by necessity, distance, and survival. When you step back and look at the rifles we've explored, a clearer picture emerges. The Winchester Model 1873 earned its place as a trusted companion of the frontier. Reliable, fast, and everywhere you looked. It may not have delivered overwhelming power, but it gave everyday men the ability to defend themselves in a world that rarely offered second chances. Then came the Winchester Model 1876, a heavier, more forceful answer to bigger problems. It didn't care about subtlety. It was built for impact, for moments when the target or the threat was too large to ignore. Hunters and frontiersmen respected it because when it spoke, things tended to fall. And pushing even further, rifles like the Marlin Model 1895 carried that idea to its extreme. Raw stopping power became its identity, where one shot wasn't just expected to work, it had to. In the most dangerous moments, there was no room for hesitation, and this rifle made sure there wasn't. But even beyond individual weapons, the real truth of the frontier was simpler and harsher. Survival didn't belong to the fastest draw in a duel. It belonged to the one who understood distance, timing, and firepower. The one who could strike first, strike harder, and strike from farther away. So maybe the Wild West wasn't won by gunfighters at all. Maybe it was won by something quieter, colder, and far more calculated, and that leaves us with one final question. How much of what we think we know about the frontier is legend? And how much is built on lead, smoke, and survival?